Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you from all over Europe to our forum Young Theology. Our topic on this term is Protestantism and Participation. My name is Kathleen Müller. Some of you will know me. I'm a pastor in training from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Brunswick, that's in Germany, and currently I'm working at the head office of the Communion of Protestant Churches in Europe. And my working place is now in Vienna in Austria, and I will moderate this evening for you. I'm very much looking forward to this evening. And especially a very warm welcome to Professor Thorsten Dietz and Iréne Schwyn. We announced that Schwyn will be here with us today, but unfortunately she has some other businesses. That's why Iréne Schwyn from the Reformed Church in Switzerland jumped in. Thank you very much. And I will introduce both a little bit later. This digital academy is organized by the Protestant League. And the Protestant League works in close cooperation with the Protestant churches in Germany. It promotes theological education and the knowledge of different Christian denominations, as well as ecumenical understanding. And in collaboration with the Communion of Protestant Churches in Europe, CPCE, and the Center of Protestant Theology in Eastern Europe, that's called ZITO. It organizes these conferences for young theologians dealing with the topic on Protestantism and participation. The Digital Academy is founded by the program Erasmus+ of the European Union. Therefore, we are very grateful. Thanks a lot. And firstly, I will give you some technical advices. We will record the conference. If you don't agree with that, please turn off your camera. And in general, please turn off your microphone when you are not speaking. And if you like, you are invited to turn on your camera, then we can see us. And thank you that you are here. Today, we will broaden the topic Protestantism and participation on a more practical way. Our topic today is called Shelter and Advocate, Churches and Minorities. Often, some people or groups are treated unequally or they are excluded. And this challenges Protestant churches in two ways. On the one hand, how can churches be a place for diversity and at the same time not discourage anyone? And on the other hand, how can churches stand in public for social participation of minority groups? The example of LGBT+ will be used to illustrate, on the one hand, internal church conflicts and dynamics in dealing with minorities, and on the other hand, possibilities for public action by churches. We have tonight two inputs by Thorsten Dietz and Iréne Schwyn, sorry. And we have two breakout sessions where you can discuss, and all of your national and church contexts can be seen. But first of all, I want to warm up you, and I will ask you in two Mentimeter surveys which groups of minorities are visible in your church and which groups are missing. Marcel from the Protestant League, he typed in the link in the chat. Now you can open the chat and you can answer this question. And then I have another Mentimeter survey for you. But at first we will do this part. Now you see my screen. Am I right? Can you give me a sign, please, if you see my screen? Okay, thank you. So what minorities are visible in your church? We have, most of all our refugees. That maybe could be a reason because of the war and of 2015. And then we see that we have the gay people and LGBT people, lesbian. So I think this is a big one group. Then we have also the disabled people or people with handicaps. That's another group. Then we also have Black people here. Yeah, so I see that there are like 4 groups. We have minorities based on nationality or ethnic backgrounds. Then we have people, handicapped people, women, and then we have minorities based on sexual identity. Yep. So, and now the next vote. Okay. Are churches safe spaces? 4 of you voted for yes, of course, 2 no, and 8 of you voted for partially. Iréne Schwyn, she will talk about later about the question, are churches safe spaces? And she will define more what safe spaces are. Okay. Thank you very much for the survey. And now I would like to introduce Thorsten Dietz and Iréne Schwyn. Thorsten Dietz, he was born in 1971 in Gelsenkirchen in Germany, and he's a professor of systematic. And he's a professor at the University of Marburg, and next to it, he's also working for the Reformed Church in Switzerland and Zurich for the adult education. And he's also a member of the CPCE study group, which is working on a document on sexuality and gender. Thanks to have you here. And second, I want to welcome Iréne Schwyn. She's a parish minister and a member of the Executive Council of the Reformed Church of Zug in Switzerland. She has been active in church politics concerning the place of queer people since the 90s, both in Switzerland and on a European level. And she was part of the board of the European Forum for LGBT Christian groups. And for several years, she was responsible for leadership trainings for leaders of queer Christian groups in Central and Eastern Europe. Thank you to have you here, both. And now there's the floor for Thorsten Dietz for his presentations about participation in the church and queer people, theological perspectives. Now you have the floor.
Thank you for your invitation. You can see the slides, I hope. My presentation, participation in the church and queer people. So I'm sorry, I'm a little bit sick, but I hope you understand me. A lot of people in Germany are sick at the moment, me too, but I hope it will be possible to speak. As we have heard for the last 2 years, I've been a member of a CPCE study group. We wrote a paper on the Church's approach to questions of sexuality and gender. A first version of the text is now finished and will be discussed with representatives of the member churches. You can see it here. There's no longer male and female, a guide to gender and sexuality. It will be discussed in February next year in Dresden. And I will try to give you a brief overview of the content of our study. It's a text of about 200 pages, so the overview will be short and cannot address much that is presented in detail, but I will try. And here we go. First question, church as advocate and safe space, claims of Protestant ethics in Europe. Part of the church's self-understanding is that its witness to the gospel is guided by the option for the poor and the marginalized people. The church sees itself as an advocate in society for marginalized and disadvantaged. Therefore, one thing above all should be self-evident, that these people do not also experience disadvantage in the church. Church must be a safe place for them. In view of many issues, this is the consensus of the CPCE. It's stated, you can see it here in Protestant in Europe, Social Ethics Contributions of the CPCE. Queer people have not had this experience with the church. In many denominations, sexual ethics were geared toward protecting marriage, because it was believed that this would point the way for many to good life according to God's commandments. The social exclusion of queer people, the church and in a society, was not questioned, but was partly justified theologically, partly demanded as necessary. Why is there such a big gap between claim and reality when you look at the treatment of queer people? Second, Protestant hermeneutics and Christian ethics. That the Holy Scriptures are the foundation of Christian theology is a starting point of our study, as it is in the statement of the CPC. In this text here is about scripture and confessions. It is a consensus of all churches in the communion of Protestant churches in Europe that the Holy Scriptures are of fundamental importance for faith and life. At the heart of the Protestant understanding of Scripture is the awareness that faith in the gospel is the decisive starting point for the Church's approach to Scripture. In another study text of the CPCE, Before I Formed You, it says, according to Protestant understanding, the only source and guideline of faith is Scripture, because and inasmuch as it testifies to the gospel of Jesus Christ that underlies and arouses faith. Here you see this study text, Before I Formed You, in the WOMP. It's important for our study as well. And we say a framework for attempting this task can be found in the Methodist tradition, in which sources of Christian faith and life are often summarized as scripture, tradition, reason, and experience, the so-called Wesleyan quadrilateral. You see it in the next picture. So here, you see it here, which has also been taken up and used widely in other Christian traditions, Protestant traditions, we have to say. In line with the Reformation sola scriptura position, tradition, reason, and experience are not to be understood as independent sources of authority to be weighed against Scripture. Instead, they stand in what the American Methodist biblical scholar Richard Hayes has called a hermeneutical relation to it. In other words, in our theological and ethical reasoning, the witness of Scripture on the questions we are exploring is understood and interpreted with the aid of tradition, reason, and experience. This is an important framework developed in other texts, and we use it in our text as well. In Protestant ethical tradition, as explicated in previous CPCE documents, there were some fundamental ethical ideals or principles developed as freedom, responsibility, the sacredness of life, one could say, and justice. And listening to Scripture, aware of the Church's learning history as reflected in tradition, openness to reasonable perception of contemporary experience. This is the context in which we seek orientation from the center of the biblical witness in all questions, and of course in the questions that relate to sexuality and gender. I give a brief overview on some reflections on questions about gender trouble, science, experience, and theology. The growing recognition of gender equality is very widely acknowledged in the CPCE space. This is one question we always come back to. Today's discussions on gender raise the question even further. Is the distinction between man and woman to be understood exclusively in the sense of a binary system, that every human being is either unambiguously man or unambiguously woman? Would any deviations then be considered a disease or a disturbance of a natural order? This may be called a conservative position. Today's natural sciences and the experience of many people argue for a greater diversity. From the perspective of an evolutionary reproductive biology, of course, the distinction between male and female is plausible, of course. The existence of physical differences between the sexes is known as sexual dimorphism. But just looking at the variations in human genetics and fully at the hormonal and neurological difference between people show us a more diverse picture. On all these levels, there is more than a pure either-or of exactly two sexes. There is a growing scientific evidence that genetic, epigenetic, and hormonal influences on fertile brain development play a part in shaping gender identity and contribute to gender incongruence in some individuals. There are still theological positions today for which gender is a binary category associated with essential properties. But increasingly, the sciences and also theology reject both an essentialist understanding of gender and a binary usage of this category. Reading biblical text in relation to experience allows a route for Protestant theological reflections that does not entail understanding gender as a binary structure of male or female, but rather as a continuum and an inclusive category. Intersex people and trans people are a reality. They do not fit into an exclusive binary scheme. Essentialist definitions and binary attributions have hurt many people. The named principles of Christian ethics, like justice or love or the sacredness and worth of human life, lead us to be open to the perception of diversity of real people, also independent of exact clarifications of scientific questions. If categories lead to exclusion of people already by making them invisible, they have to be critically questioned. The other big issue of our paper, of course, is sexual ethics. I will concentrate on the question of same-sex marriage. We talk about a lot of other questions, but in many churches, there's still a lot of discussion and debate about same-sex marriage. So this will be here the topic I will address. In our study, we do not revisit the exegetical debates of recent decades. These disputes have been conducted at length. It is undisputed in historic scientific exegesis that the biblical text did not know homosexual people in a modern sense. Neither were equal lasting love relationships of people of the same sex conceivable. No serious historical interpretation of the Bible can justify the condemnation of today's forms of homosexual love. The partly attempted artificial distinction between homosexual acts and a homosexual disposition shows that such attempts have to ignore today's experience of real people and the human scientific consensus. So these questions have been discussed for many decades. We try to sum up this debate. The question is how to deal with the debates that are still going on in a lot of churches. Can people in same-sex relationships be ordained? Can believers living in same-sex partnerships or marriage be blessed in the same way as all other people? That are questions that are still disturbing a lot of churches, the unity of the church, and a lot of families and a lot of Christians in Europe. It's especially in some third churches in Eastern Europe, there's a great majority who still doesn't want to discuss it. They still think it's impossible to accept same-sex marriage or same-sex couples. In other countries, northern parts of Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands, Scandinavia, these questions have been discussed in the 90s and in the last 10 years. And it's a difficult question how to move on as a European European organization of different churches with different opinions on these questions. We show that in the understanding of marriage, since the Reformation, there always have been a lot of new further developments. There's a lot of development in the understanding of marriage since the 16th century. So a logic of further development of marriage is also in the line with the central principles of Christian ethics, as we have stated them. So it's our position that it is possible to find a broader understanding of marriage that includes people in same-sex partnerships and in same-sex marriage, but we have to acknowledge that some churches are not willing to accept it or to see it this way. So our last question is how to deal with these tensions. May there be a kind of Protestant corridor? is it possible to live with different opinions, with different deeply held theological convictions in sexual ethics? First, we say the communion of Protestant churches in Europe is based on the fact that they have found unity in the common confession of the gospel. This was Leuenberg, 1973. Not all classical theological questions could be solved, but there was a unity in the confession of the gospel. This was and is compatible with a legitimate diversity of theological development of doctrine, which does justice to the respective cultural challenges of the respective churches. This also applies to today's controversial questions of ethics. Is this a solution? We just have to be we just have to hold on to the unity in our common confession of the gospel, and it doesn't matter what differences we have in ethical questions. Well, the problem is, for decades, churches have sought compromises that have emphasized the unity of the church more than the participation of the excluded. And how can the church become a safe place without falling into divisions? This does not mean, of course, that in a fellowship of churches, everything possible can stand side by side. Churches must strive to remain in conversation with each other and to strive for possible commonality also in the implications of the gospel. The image of the corridor does not stand for arbitrary diversity, but churches among themselves sometimes have to endure a certain spectrum of positions and remain in conversation about these differences. Churches were not and are not a safe place for many people, for a lot of minorities. For a long time, they didn't realize that they were dealing with queer people and not with questions or theology or ethics about queer people. There were real people in the church, and they were unseen and unheard. The churches believed that advocating for certain orders of marriage and family would be something that served all people. Today, when we call for equality for all people, regardless of gender or orientation, sexual orientation, we think it's not a break with Christian tradition. It is a continuation of a long Protestant tradition. Constant reform is part of the constancy of Protestantism. There are churches today for whom anything other than equality of all relationships is a form of discrimination. And there are other churches that fundamentally understand the need for change of traditional doctrines. They equally try hard to hold on to their conviction that the Bible knows marriage only as the union of a man and a woman, and that the church must not exclude anyone. And in some churches, this is a real tension and a huge struggle. In our paper, there's a clear positioning for the participation of all people in the life of the church. That is why we think an expanded understanding of marriage is appropriate, including same-sex marriage. At the same time, this paper is meant as a bridge. By giving such a detailed reasoning in this paper, why the belonging of queer people is not contradictory to the gospel and to the respect of the Holy Scriptures as authority for the whole church. Crucially and lastly, that still is to say, this conversation can no longer be had without the affected people themselves, having their say. They were heard in our working group. They were included in our working group. There were queer people and not queer people working on this paper. And we think it's important and necessary to debate and to discuss these questions, but not as a discussions about questions about theology. It must be a discussion with real people if we really want to find a just solution in these ethical questions. In the end, here are a few questions for the breakout sessions to come. First, we are from different European backgrounds. What is the state of the debate on these issues, same-sex marriage or recognition of trans or non-binary people in your churches? Second, what makes the discussions particularly difficult? And what experiences have given courage and hope? I think we have very different experiences in our churches all over Europe, and there may be a lot of things to say to both questions. Third, in your experience, what is the most important thing queer people need in churches with tense discussions? And fourth, what has contributed to a significant increase in the acceptance of queer people in the church or in your church? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Thorsten Dietz, for your presentation. I think it was very fruitful for us to hear how we as Christians can meet today challenges, and that we as Christians we shall be open for the diversity, and that it is not a break with the tradition, and how we can speak as Christians with different thoughts and opinions. Thank you. And now I will invite you into breakout rooms. We have 20 minutes to discuss. And after the groups, we will come back in the plenum for a small 10 minutes feedback. Yeah. And now you've got the questions in the chat, and please take some notes in your group. It would be helpful if one of your group will be a speaker, and if you don't know each other, I would recommend you to introduce yourself at first in the groups, and you can tell from which church and from which country you are. And now have a fun and productive conversation. And Marcel, he will invite us to the breakout rooms. Thank you. Okay, I hope you had fruitful discussions. And now you have the floor until 7:10 if you have some questions to Thorsten Dietz, now you have the floor to ask him, or if you like to report some highlights of your discussions in your group, then you have now the floor to speak.
So maybe I start from our group.
Thank you.
We were a group of 4 persons from Italy, Romania, Germany, and France. And we discussed a lot about the question of same-sex marriage. And the impression we got is that we have a variety of different options. We have people are blessed, or they have a real marriage. Then we had the situation that the church allows it, but the special community does not allow it. That it depends on the pastor which you ask. And this all came down for us to the point that the main question is not whether there are theological reasons for or against it, but it's mostly tradition. It's tradition of the church, it's tradition of the community. It's a question of self-understanding of the pastor. And a very big factor is how same-sex marriages are accepted in the society. So, for example, Gerhard from Romania told us that there is almost no discussion about this question in Romania. So it would be very progressive of a Lutheran community there anyways to start this and to take the issue up. And in opposite to the situation in Germany or in France. And the last factor, which we said, it is mainly down to the fourth question, that representation is very important for the church to become a safe space. That if you have pastors, if you have volunteers in communities which belong to these groups, it's a main factor to raise acceptance and to open doors for same-sex marriages. So I hope Gerhard and Giovanni, this is okay for you, what I said. Yeah. Okay, good.
Thank you, Miriam. This was a lot and very different from church to church. Thank you. Are there any other highlights? All of you are muted.
Oh, now we can speak.
Okay.
But it was very good, Miriam. Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to say anything.
Maybe I can add something to the same-sex marriages, because in our group, we had the privilege that the speaker was in our group, and I could ask my question, and maybe I can share it with you, because in the presentation it was said that homosexuality was not known in the biblical context. And I asked the speaker, what about Romans 1? And I want to read out what it is written there. Women no longer wanted to have sex in a natural way, and they did things with each other that were not natural. Men behave in the same way. They stopped wanting to have sex with women and had strong desires for sex with other men. They did shameful things with each other, and what has happened to them is punishment for their foolish deeds. And I asked the speaker what he says about this, and his answer was interesting. He said that in this context, it's about shame and honor. And what he said in the presentation was about homosexuality as a personality trait. What came up later in the, I'm not so sure, but it was the 18th century or somehow. And yes, I wanted to share this because it was my question, and maybe it's also interesting for you.
Thank you, Selina.
I could continue. Okay, we spoke about, for example, a big issue, simply the lack of meeting, of experience. Like some people have never really met someone who is like this or like that, or don't want to engage. One thing was about the problem of mixing debates or mixing arguments. If you say that if this happens, also this or that will happen, but this is not logical, strange. Okay, lack of meeting, lack of possibility to engage, confusing, mixing up arguments, or like saying that if one thing happens, also this or that, like other bad things will happen. But this is an unlogical argument. And you are right now talking about time dimension. This is one of my personal thoughts about that. Some groups say, come on, we're living in the 21st century, so how can you still think like this or that? And the problem is like that time does not serve as an argument. there is no automatic change. So it's not like that the history of ideas, of thoughts is automatically going in this or that direction. So it cannot be used as an argument. But if you use it as an argument, it becomes like illogical or ridiculous or provocative for other parts, especially then if you say there's a part of the church which is not using Bible anymore to argue or hermeneutics, just focusing on so-called progress in history as if it were automatic. You're losing also the Protestant way of searching for truth or for knowledge or for whatever. And then the whole debate becomes ridiculous. But at the end, also we said, maybe it's not a debate, but first of all, a meeting and a dialogue that should happen.
Thank you, Benedict. So I think we have to go on with our program for tonight. And I would like to, invite Mrs. Iréne Schwyn to present her presentation on safe spaces and practical challenges. So now you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm waiting for the PowerPoint to start, but I can start with the introduction. Whenever we want minorities to join our congregations, we have to ask ourselves, are we truly willing to listen to their stories? Talk with us, not about us, or more formally, nothing about us without us. This is the basic demand of almost any group of people, especially marginalized ones. So how do we talk with people? How do we address controversial topics? How do we mitigate power imbalances? How do we handle the fact that sexuality is not just a topic, but part of our very being? Drawing from my experience in various European Christian contexts, I shall give examples why and for what purposes safe spaces are needed. Towards the end, I shall say some words concerning diverse religious voices in society, in politics, among churches, and introduce some resources that are available online concerning churches and queer people. I shall focus on queer Christians, but a lot of what I'm saying can be applied to other minorities as well. The first question, next slide, please. What is a safe space? The most basic definition is a safe space is a space which enables respectful conversation. That means also that a safe space does not exist all the time. It is set up specifically so that a conversation may take place. In recurrent meetings, the safe space is set up each and every time a meeting takes place. A safe space gives a framework where people's stories may be told and can be heard. Safe space conversations do not aim to result in consent. Their purpose is to deepen understanding. In order for that to happen, there needs a certain framework, some rules and precautions. Safe space conversations need physical safety. Participants need to be reasonably sure that they are safe going to the conversation, during the conversation, and leaving the conversation. And especially if you're talking about queer people, this is not a given. Even in so-called safe countries, physical attacks happen, and deliberate disturbances as well. You need rules for conversations so that we actually can listen to each other and do not start to blame or verbally attack each other. In a Western context, I would suggest drawing from the practice of nonviolent conversation. And you need rules for afterwards. How can we speak about what we experienced And how do we protect the confidentiality of the safe space conversation and the safety of the participants? Within and among churches, views and opinions concerning queer issues vary widely. And in addition to the content-based disagreements we've been talking about, we all bring our personal histories to the table, our joys, our hurts, our fears and insecurities. This makes any conversation emotionally fraught. Hopefully, in a safe space, we may gain a deeper understanding, both of ourselves and of those who have a different perspective. Now, the question is, are churches safe spaces? Generally speaking, from the point of view of queer people, the answer is a resounding no. Churches are not a safe space for queer people. Of course, this varies depending on the church and the wider society. But even in a church that is as queer inclusive as the Protestant church in Switzerland, unpleasant encounters and outright discrimination occur on a regular basis. Wherever queer Christians gather, experiences of faith-based pressure, of exclusion, and outright excommunication abound. Many queer Christians have been told that they can be either queer or Christian, but not both. These occurrences affect also those queer Christians who have no such experience personally. This attitude is also quite widespread in society. To illustrate, a gay resident of a senior citizens' home asked the nursing staff to relay his request for pastoral counseling. This led to a discussion among the staff how they should handle this request and whether they should try to prevent it in order to protect the resident. The church and its representatives were perceived as a threat to the health and sanity of the resident. Church as a danger and a threat. This flies into the face of what many of us consider church to be. But just because you feel safe in church, do not assume that everybody feels the same. Next slide, please. First and foremost, safe spaces are an opportunity to meet. Back in the 1990s, Reformed congregations in German-speaking Switzerland were confronted with quite a lot of media coverage concerning church ministers coming out as gay, same-sex couples seeking a blessing for their relationship in church. Numerically, there were only a few such instances. But suddenly, many congregations asked themselves, what would we do if that happened in our church? They organized discussion rounds, explicitly inviting gay and lesbian Christians to come and participate in the discussion. Usually, these queer people came from other parts of Switzerland. The congregations themselves either didn't know their own queer members, or the locals were not ready to speak up. Interestingly, quite often during the discussion, suddenly a member of the congregation said, "My son is gay, my daughter is lesbian." Without a discussion, these parents may never have said so in church. Maybe they would have kept this aspect of their family life hidden for much longer. For the other members of the conversation, the meetings and these statements made queer people real. Suddenly, queers were no longer very odd people they have never met, but someone they knew, the son or daughter of a fellow Christian. The Protestant church in Switzerland is one of the few mainstream churches that allowed blessing services for same-sex couples before there was equal marriage or even a partnership law. The various discussions in the congregations laid the foundation that made this possible. Actually, I even dare to say the discussion in the churches helped towards the political advancement The civil partnership law might not have been voted in at the turn of the millennium if the discussions in the churches hadn't taken place. Church does have an impact on public opinion, and the participatory process in opinion building can be a powerful force. One word of caution: when people start to come out, to be known as queer to a broader public, the first ones are usually younger adults who, apart from being queer, are quite independent and otherwise belong to the majority groups of a society. They are less vulnerable than people belonging to several minorities simultaneously, or people who are dependent on others for their daily needs. This doesn't mean that there are no queer people among these latter groups. To illustrate, recently a fellow pastor told me to stop talking about queers in church and finally focus on important issues like Ukrainian refugees. He suffered from a fundamental misconception. He pretended that all refugees are straight and cisgender. But people are not just one thing. There are queer refugees. There are queer elderly. And all of them may be Christian as well. Because they are very vulnerable, they often protect themselves by hiding. It might be obvious. Unfortunately, it needs repeating. If we talk about participation, we need to give people a chance to participate, to tell their story. This means creating a safe space, not just for the reasonably strong, but mainly for the vulnerable people in society. People who belong to minorities need networks. For many queer Christians, queer Christian groups were and are the first point of contact. A safe space can be a place for a minority to gather, a meeting place for queer Christians. Here, they don't have to explain themselves. They are, for once, not the only ones, and not the odd ones. Ideally, it is a place to relax, to reflect on one's experience, to heal and to grow. A place to pray and participate in Christian worship. The specific and the main focus varies. Also, for those involved in more public discussions, these groups are often an important support structure, a place where they can learn to tell their story, where they can recover and ask for help. Unfortunately, this ideal doesn't happen automatically. Members of minorities can be impatient, irritable, preoccupied with their own personal experience, unwilling to address the differences and power imbalances within the group. One example is gays, lesbians, bisexual, trans people do not always mix easily. Some people are even outright traumatized. Worst case, the group members do not only not help each other, but tear each other down. Creating a safe space for a group to meet is an effort. Somebody needs to define the rules, explain them to all participants, and enforce compliance when necessary. This can be quite challenging, especially for people who have not much specific training. In some churches, queer people are not accepted into leadership training. Therefore, self-organized queer Christian groups sometimes lack skilled facilitators. I noticed this when I was responsible for leadership training for queer Christian group leaders in Central and Eastern Europe. Many group leaders had business leadership skills, but no experience in leading conversation groups, or even more challenging self-help groups. The European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups has developed programs to support such group leaders. Queer Christian groups in Central and Eastern Europe are often quite small. Group leaders need support from outside their own group, a person with whom they can talk things through, someone who is not part of the group dynamics. I'm leaving now the safe space. Next slide, please. And we want to ask a few questions. Next slide, please. Oh no, stop, go back, sorry. Where does your church stand? Does your church condemn queer people as diseased sinners? Or do you belong to one of those churches where all members are equal, but some are a bit more equal than others? Is your church outspoken? And if so, how? Or does it prefer to remain quiet and hopes that nobody is making waves? I think this is a topic for the breakout rooms after my presentation. I want to focus on 2 points concerning public discussion. Religious voices in politics are usually conservative, focusing on things like traditional family. A bit more than 10 years ago, the Dutch government approached the European Forum, saying we need a progressive religious voice in politics on a European level. This led to the European Forum entering politics, a lengthy process. Nowadays, it is a recognized international non-governmental organization at the Council of Europe. I'm not involved in this work. Yet I was told of encounters with politicians who before meeting the EF representatives, could not imagine a progressive faith voice. And I would like to encourage progressive Christians to speak of their faith. The other aspect is unity among churches. We have seen churches split over discussions concerning the place of queer people in church. Admittedly, in Protestantism, institutional unity is of limited importance. On a deeper spiritual level, we are challenged to recognize each other as siblings in Christ, called and baptized into the same body. I must admit, I do not always find this easy. Yet I remember the first apostles and their meeting in Jerusalem, Acts 15 or Galatians 2. These 2 accounts are barely recognizable as relating to the same meeting. Facts recounted differ profoundly. Yet both breathe a spirit of unity, of knowing they belong together. As long as we manage to maintain this conviction of belonging, we stay connected. I would now like to point out a few resources you may use in your further discussions and your work. Next slide, please. Sometimes it's easier to read personal stories than to find a person willing to tell them to you. This collection of personal stories was collected for the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches this September in Karlsruhe and was translated in 10 languages. You have the link afterwards. Next slide, please. This report on inclusivity of churches towards LGBTI people is available online. Maybe you find your church, maybe not. The study has a few weaknesses, especially it doesn't differentiate enough between lesbians and gays and bisexual, trans, inter people. But the questions in the questionnaire, how inclusive is your church? And the recommendations how progress might happen are certainly worth thinking about. Next slide, please. In my presentation of Safe Space, I've been drawing heavily on this resource paper of the World Council of Churches that was accepted last February by the Central Committee. This concept of safe space has been adopted as a useful method to address questions of human sexuality, not just around queer people, but on a much broader range of topics, such as gender-related forms of injustice, gender and sex-related health issues, as well as sexualized forms of exploitations and violence. It's a resource paper. It's not easy reading, but it's a thorough documentation of safe space conversation in churches as a whole. Thank you for your attention. The next slide says questions, but I think we're going to the breakout rooms. I'm giving back to Kathleen Müller. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Schwyn, for your experiences and for your presentation about what queer people need to participate in churches, about what safe spaces are in general, and also about the chances for churches to create safe spaces. And thank you very much for your resources. And now you will be invited to a breakout room again. We also have 20 minutes to discuss, and we prepared some questions to you on a Padlet. Marcel, he will send you the link to the Padlet in the chat. And if you belong to breakout room number 1, then please use the text boxes which belongs to group number 1. And while you discuss in your group these questions, you also can see parallel the reactions of the other groups. I think, which is really nice.
How do we know in which group we are?
If you are invited in a breakout room, there always is marked breakout room 1 or 2 or 3. So you have to keep an eye on it before you go into the breakout room. Okay, and yep. So now you have time until 10 to 8. Yes. And after this, we will come back in the plenum for the conclusion. Now have fun and have a productive conversion and discussion. Okay, I think we are back now. And I hope you had fruitful discussions again, and we noticed that there was on the Padlet a wide floor over Europe, and it was good to see all the differences. Thank you very much. And now we come to our conclusion, and I typed in some last questions that I think we can speak out here on the floor, all of us. My last question is, did you learn anything helpful tonight? And did you learn anything for your practice, or what can we as churches learn from your experiences, and what are your results of the evening? Yes, we just have some minutes now. Miriam.
We started now telling stories to each other in which situations we experience that in the local communities, although people are not openly talking against homosexuality, we feel that they have motives. And it was really helpful to me to share this experience with people from Italy and Romania and other places, and to see they really have the same problems. And the final question is now, so we are all awaiting Thorsten Dietz for the paper of CPCE. What model did you find to find unity in the differences? Because that's what we experience in the local congregations. And we can read and write as many theological texts as we want. In the end, the crucial questions are treated on the very basic level in the communities, in the church coffee after the service. That's where we are really have the confrontation. Thank you.
Mr. Dietz, do you want to answer, or is it okay to have
course.
this open question?
Theology is not a solution. It's really not. Theology can help to stay in conversation, and that's impossible. That people can tell their stories, can share their lives, and theology cannot give the definite answers on these questions, but calls to listen and to hear and to look what's really happening and to stay in conversation. There's no other way.
Thank you. Hannah Kerein.
Yeah, I said this in our first breakout session, and a lot of the discussions that we had this evening remind me of the visit of Junge Kirche Gießen that we had in the last sessions, where we talked about the role of the pastor being someone who's encouraging people to participate and to opening up possibilities to participate and get away all the things and problems that hinder people and stop them from participate in the church. And we also raised how difficult this job is, and I was reminded of that when Iréne Schwyn talked about how difficult it is to create safe spaces, and that just because you belong to a minority, it doesn't mean that you can easily create a safe space for others of this minority, or have a feeling of where safe space might be for yourself. Yeah, right. And so this is ongoing question, not only connected to queers and not only connected to young people, and not only connected to participation, and not only connected to pastors and to volunteers at the church. So all these topics kind of mingle around. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. I think there's time for one or two more comments, if you like. Was there anything that surprises you or that was bothering you? I really would like to say thank you to the referents, Giovanni. Oh no, it's just an applause. Okay, not just, it's an applause. Yes, to Thorsten Dietz and Iréne Schwyn. Thank you very much for your presentations. And I think we had very interesting and fruitful discussions about participation of minorities, and to be aware and to be sensitive in churches for these groups. Thank you very much. And I also would like to say thank you to all of you who participated. We are very glad that you are here. And now I would like to invite you to the next lecture. It will be next year on the 12th of January in 2023. The topic will be church and environmental protection. And the speaker will be Elfriede Dörr. She's also here this evening. Hello. And yes, I wish you a good Christmas time and also a happy new year. And yes, I'm very glad to see you next year. Goodbye.